Hey everybody, happy Friday. Welcome to episode 37 of Sports Speak. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
We have Zoe Alter here today. We've got a great show in store for you. We'll be talking about MLB free agency first off. It's kind of gotten started with some surprises. The Mets have already made their first signing in the Steve Cohen era, but a lot of big surprises with the Braves and the Cubs and the Brewers non-tendering some big-time players, so we'll talk about that. And then we'll shift gears to the NFL. The Ravens, all memes aside, Trace McSorley is their quarterback right now, and they almost beat the undefeated Steelers, who had their own problems in the Wednesday afternoon game. We'll talk about that, as well as the NFC East, and we'll give our weekly picks at the end of the show. Me and Tim, we're now separated by just one game after last week. I'm 30-6 now. Tim is 29-7. But let's start with baseball, and I'll give it to Zoe first. I saw you were pretty excited about the Trevor May signing, which a lot of people, some of the Mets fans who think that Steve Cohen's just going to sign every single player on the market are like, who's this Trevor May kid? Well, he's actually really good. He's got a 3.19 ERA in his last 3 years with the Twins. He's been one of their best relievers, and now he comes to the Mets with a lot of major league experience and adds more stability to that bullpen that certainly needs it, because there's a lot of, they could be good, like Edwin Diaz and Dylan Betances, that could also struggle a lot too, and he kind of adds a little more stability to that pen for the Mets in 2021.
I mean, Eddie, that's exactly where I was going to start. I was going to start with, the relieving situation, because he has you said 3.19 ERA. I mean, even if he could let up 4 and he still wouldn't be as bad as Edwin Diaz. So I'm just excited for that, for the Mets to have a solid reliever, because they do have really strong pitching. And I know this year it was weird for us Mets fans to not have DeGrom win the Cy Young. That was like the big thing, like, whoa, we didn't get it for a third year in a row. But we've always had the strong pitching on the front end, but we've never been able to finish it on the back end. And that's something that I really like, especially about Steve Cohen, is he had to make this purchase because he had to see that he was willing to go out and he was going to make big moves. And I know all the Mets fan base, including me, is really excited for other ones. And so Trevor May, as you mentioned, was a lesser name compared to some of the other ones that I'm looking for. I'm looking for a pitcher, I'm just looking for bigger names, but he's still a huge name, and I think he's going to be a huge asset to this team.
Yeah, and, I think it's interesting, too, because everybody just expected right away he's going to go sign Trevor Bauer. Well, not really.
That's what I was going to say, yeah.
Because, you know what? There's other important parts of this team that you need to focus on. I talked about last show with Tim that the Mets do need to focus on that starting rotation in some ways, especially since Syndergaard won't be there. But bringing in a pitcher of any kind is beneficial regardless, because if you think about when they're without Syndergaard, we don't know how long it's going to take him to come back from Tommy John. If you have a starter in there, like if Seth Lugo has to go back into the rotation, if he doesn't go as far, you need more trustworthy relievers. And I'm sorry, you cannot, if you're going to be a competitive team, be turning to Robert Gesellman in the 7th inning to try to win a game. The fact that you add in May, and now you mix him in with Edwin Diaz, who I know, we roast him constantly, but last season, he did not do terrible compared to 2019. He was a little more stable. Juris Familia is still there. Betances
still there. That's all he gets.
I'm not saying he's good, but he's there, and he does have the team's all-time consecutive saves record. He's also the only pitcher in history to blow 3 games in the World Series, but but it's nice to see something happening and someone young coming into the Mets organization as well. Not like them signing Jay Bruce, who was like 5 years over the hill, and signing him multiple times. It's nice to see. But Tim, I want to shift gears to some of the people who did not get signed, because for people who are not accustomed to the weird free agency that the major leagues have, there's the tendering and non-tendering, which are basically guys, you could offer them a contract and they stay for the next season, or they're completely free on the market. And the Cubs, Braves, and Brewers, just some of the teams who made some big surprises. Which one surprises you most that was not tendered a contract on Wednesday?
Yeah, to be honest, it was who we were just talking about before we started this, and that was really Adam Duvall. He had a really good season this year, put together an awesome year. I think you said it was 16 home runs, if I'm not mistaken, earlier on the season for the Braves. But what really does surprise me, and obviously it's now more evident, even though we already knew the answer going to this offseason, that there's not going to be a DH this year. Adam Duvall was that guy for the Atlanta Braves. Don't get me wrong, he can play the corner infield, and he is a primarily outfielder. But when it's all said and done, the Braves had to make a better decision for what they needed moving forward. I am surprised that they released him and maybe didn't try to bring him in off, a coming off the bench role or a different role overall. But again, I mean, you look at this Braves team, really should have been in the World Series. Unfortunately, they fell apart. It's still a very good ball club. And I'm really excited to see where Adam Duvall goes because, well, let's be honest, with the year he had that no one expected out of him, you have to imagine he's going to get some money this year. And really with a competitive team. And if I'm being honest, Eddie, I know it sounds weird. You mentioned the Cubs as well. I could see him potentially going to the Cubs.
Yeah, Duvall too. You remember when he first came up, everybody made a big deal about him. He got into the home run derby, I think his rookie year, and was really competitive. And then he just kind of faded away. And then the Braves picked him up and he had a great 60-game slate. And he's one of those guys who took advantage of the shortened season and hopefully he can pay off, with some money here in free agency. But Zoe, Tim touched on the Cubs. They're starting to break things down. Theo Epstein left a few weeks ago, and now Kyle Schwarber, Albert Almora, both non-tendered. Even broadcaster Len Casper is riding the ship and heading out to the White Sox. I mean, is this the end of the Cubs dynasty or whatever you want to call it? Because I know a lot of teams are interested in Chris Bryant. Do you think you could see a rebuild coming here very soon for the Cubs?
I don't think you have any other choice. And honestly, I feel for the Cubs because we'll get to it later, you guys. Everyone who knows me knows I'm a huge Lions fan. And the Cubs were like what the Lions want to be. They've had all these years of not winning and they finally win and bring this together. And so I feel for the organization and I feel for the fans because they finally got what they wanted and it all fell apart really fast. The Cubs got really good really fast, but they got really bad really fast. And
are you insinuating another 120 years of sadness? Is this what we're expecting?
No, I'm just saying, you've waited so long, you might as well get a little more success out of it. But it sucks that they didn't get that. It didn't build into the dynasty they wanted it to. They got the World Series win, and now it's kind of going downhill for them. And I do think there's a rebuild coming just because your guys are hitting that point where either you need to pay them a ridiculous amount of money to keep them there, or you need to come in and bring fresh guys in. And they need to bring fresh guys in because the league's changing every day, and no team is going to get to the World Series without new, fresh faces.
And you almost feel bad for the Cubs too, because, they won their World Series, so good for them on that. But the time that they were supposed to be the class of the National League, if it had happened a couple years earlier, if they had come up, 2013, 2014, the National League was a little weaker then when it was just the Giants and then, our Mets somehow making it to the World Series in 2015. Oh, yeah. Now they're at the same time as the Dodgers and Braves both on the rise, and that's tough. And the NL Central this whole time, other than the Pirates, have been really competitive with the Cubs. I mean, the Cardinals are still really, they're a competitor and a contender for the championship every year, and the Brewers have been really solid these last few years. So the Cubs, I just think it was kind of bad timing, but, they did get the thing they wanted. They did win the World Series, so good for them on that part.
They may just have to wait another 108 years to get another one. Yeah,
the 21-24 World Series, they can start looking towards that. But let's shift gears now to the NFL because there is a lot I want to talk about. This is our first show since Thanksgiving. So, having a Lions fan here, I want to get started with how our entire country has to suffer through watching the Lions game at 12:30 in the afternoon on Thanksgiving every single year. This year against the Texans, who, they're a 3-7 team, and then all of a sudden they look amazing against the Lions. The Lions got off to a decent start, but a couple of bad turnovers in the first half. But, Zoe, are you happy about this move? Matt Patricia's gone. You're rid of Patricia, and now you can try to...
I am so thrilled that Matt Patricia is gone. I thought you were going to make me talk about the Thanksgiving game, and I had no excuse for it other than people were hurt. We did not have Galladay. We did not have Okudah. We did not have Swift. Those are our big three that we didn't have. But if you go into this move, I really like this move. I think it shows, obviously, they just changed management. So Martha Ford, who had the team for a while, gave it to her daughter, and her daughter's running it now. So this is kind of her daughter's first huge move. And I liked it a lot just because of the fact that she didn't wait till the end of the season to do it. A lot of times you'll see if something goes downhill, they will fire them. And Matt Patricia knew he was on, you need to win or get out of here. And there's no chance at saving this season. So he's booted. And I really like that they took Bob Quinn with him too. because they tried their Patriots, their Patriots jazz that they tried to put here. It didn't work in Detroit, and they had to go. And I like that about them. I'm not the person who looks too much into coaches for the future, especially there's still a season going on. I want to watch the games. I'm going to be more the fantasy person who spends my time on the couch, not on my phone looking at, coaches. So when they bring in a coach, I'll be able to talk about that. But for now, I'm happy they're cleansed of Patricia.
And Tim, this is just yet another former Belichick assistant that hasn't panned out as a head coach. And really, other than Brian Flores right now with the Dolphins, none of these guys are really working out. Do you think this is finally proof to some teams that maybe it's not the best idea to just turn to one of these guys?
I'll tell you what, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to disagree in one regard. I mean, I think Joe Judge is working out for the Giants, Eddie. I really think he is. And I'm not saying because I'm 4-0 on the predictions, but I really buy Joe Judge. Matt Patricia, though, let's be honest, and I'm going to agree to that point. There's a lot of Bill Belichick's guys that have come out of the system that either A, weren't ready, or just like, for example, Ben McAdoo for the Giants, weren't fit to be head coaches to begin with. They're good at their craft, but not good enough to be leaders. And I think Matt Patricia really lacked that. When you saw him not take responsibility for his lack of play calling, his lack of issues, that raises a big red flag. I'll tell you what, when you look at the Jets situation with Adam Gase, we know Adam Gase should not be the head coach of the Jets right now, but I'll give him credit where credit's due. Where the other day, and I'm just reading an article today in the New York Times, he took credibility in saying that he failed Sam Darnold. He has failed Sam Darnold to this point. So give him at least that little credit of taking ownership. With Matt Patricia, we didn't really see that. And I that's what I think the big issue is. And for the Lions, you're going through this whole process. You were getting age out going into the season, trying to rebuild with youth. This is the best thing you can do to better this Detroit team. I'm still worried about Matthew Stafford's health moving forward because he's going to continue to take hit after hit after hit. But this is a big thing for his career and the Detroit Lions as a whole. I think, how they play out the rest of this season really is going to set up for what they do in the offseason. Because I'm not going to deny, and I agree with you, Zoe, as well, you mentioned, this isn't a bad Lions football team. They're not a New York Jets. They're right there in the brink. They just need a big player. They need something big to overturn, and I feel this is the first step towards change, which could be positive. But I do want to raise another point, because you did mention, Eddie, the constant failures of Belichick coaching. But one thing in particular, not necessarily about Bill Belichick coaching, but what we've seen this year in particular is that coaching in general has really been held to a different standard. I don't recall a season in a while, if I'm being honest, where we've had this many firings this early. So I don't really think it's just a product of, for example, a Bill Belichick or an Andy Reid, for example, in which his groups had a lot of success. I think it's that teams are starting to be more responsible and they want to see success now when there's more eyes than ever watching the game.
Yeah, and we're seeing, I think some of these teams like the Texans and even the Lions, both Bill O'Brien and Matt Patricia entered this season on very short leashes. Even with the Texans, even though the Texans made it to the divisional round, these are two coaches that if they had any trouble this year, they were going to get canned. I think everybody kind of expected that. I kind of just feel like this is the passage of time, but I will agree with you to a point, Tim, that we're seeing, especially this year, teams are really starting to value the coach. And, I think we were talking about this a few weeks ago, with the NBA, how the coach doesn't seem to matter as much. It's more so the players there. But I think that football right now, especially in the NFL this year, is the complete opposite. Teams are realizing the value of a coach. And you were talking about Joe Judge, who he is doing a decent job out there with the Giants. Not having Saquon Barkley, and they're 4-7, and they did beat a team that was not in the NFC East. So let's turn to the NFC East right now. Let's talk about that second Thanksgiving game, which is probably the Cowboys' worst embarrassment in quite a while, losing by 26 at home on Thanksgiving against Washington. Zoe, what is the direction with the Cowboys right now? I know there's no Prescott, but even when they had Dak at the beginning of the season, it wasn't going that well. and Mike McCarthy has certainly not provided too much of a spark as a coach. What do you think the Cowboys have to look towards the rest of the season?
The three things the Cowboys have always had or have had right now. They have Dak, they have Zeke, and they have their offensive line. Those are the three things that when you think of the Cowboys, you think of them. And I think the issue becomes you gave up that many points to Washington. You need to take a step back and focus on your defense because, sure, Zeke may not be performing how you want him to perform and you don't have Dak right now. But what better time? If your offense isn't working, that means your defense has to work twice as hard. And their defense is working half as hard because they're collapsing. So I say if you're the Cowboys, you need to take a step back and look at your defense, improve everything you can there, and then you can come back to your offense. Because I don't know why I like Dak sometimes, but they believe in Dak a lot. And they think that he's going to be just as good when he gets back from injury, which is a little delusional, but you can deal with that another time. But I think they do believe in Dak. They do believe in Zeke. And they know, I don't think anyone is more egotistical about their offense than the Cowboys are. And that's fine. They can have that. But because that offense will be back on the field, they need to work on their defense. That has to be their number one priority.
I will be honest, though, their offense has not been nearly as good as past years. I mean, Ezekiel Elliott has not had a great season. He's had spurts, but there's been a lot of times, and the offensive line has caved in a few times on these quarterbacks, too. I mean, I know they haven't had much help with their quarterbacks, having Andy Dalton and then Ben DiNucci as their quarterback, and then Garrett Gilbert. It just kept getting worse and worse for them. But you know, the offensive line, which is typically one of those things you trust with the Cowboys, has not been as great as past years. They have a couple bright spots. Of course, they have a couple decent signs on defense like Jalen Smith, DeMarcus Lawrence, and then, of course, the receiving core, CeeDee Lamb, the rookie. I mean, I don't know how he fell so far in the draft to a Cowboy pick because he fits perfectly with that offense. Amari Cooper's having a decent year. But once again, this is a Cowboys team that the media tries to hype up as one of the best in the NFC, and every year they make it seem like they're going to be an instant contender with like the Packers or the Saints, and then we realize they're a mediocre team, and they're just as good at every NFC East team. And I mean, it's just getting kind of idiotic at this point with the Cowboys. But I want to shift gears to the Giants, Tim, because they got the win over the Bengals, albeit that was against a team without Joe Burrow, and every single one of their wins has been close, but a lot of their losses have been close too. They've been very competitive with some teams, and 4-7 is actually a really good record at this point in the NFC East. Do you think the Giants have a solid path, even if they're missing Daniel Jones these next couple of weeks, to win the division?
100%. I actually think the Giants have a chance to win the NFC East. And if I'm being honest, as sad as this sounds, the difference of Dave Gettleman keeping his job and getting fired is if the Giants win or lose the NFC East. We know they're going to go below 500. Let's be honest. The Giants aren't going to win out this season. And for the record, I have no faith in them winning this Sunday against the Seattle team, especially if they don't have Daniel Jones. But I'm not saying they're not going to be competitive. They're going to give a fight. If there's one thing the Giants have done very well this year in particular, they've actually done a pretty good job defending against the mobile quarterbacks. Obviously, unfortunately for Dak Prescott, it resulted in injury, but we saw how they handled against him. You know, we saw how they handled with their pass rush of getting pressure and really being effective. And you look into this next week in a big game against Russell Wilson. It's a matter of if you can be there to compete, because let's not forget that the Seattle defense is really bad. Really, really bad.
Aren't they like last in the league? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. It's the worst Pete Carroll defense there's been in a very long time, well before the Legion of Boom. And the fact of the matter is that if you can stay close and competitive defensively, you have a chance to win a football game. But I'm also going to be realistic and say the Giants don't need to win this game to still have a chance to win the division. You have to play the Browns still. Who knows what the Ravens do? Because let's be honest, I mean, Daniel Jones has more throwing yards than Lamar Jackson this year. Who would have ever thought that? And he's rushing a lot better than Lamar is too, based upon what we've seen. Of course, that injury could set things back. But what it really comes down to, if I'm being honest, week 17 against Dallas. I think that is what's going to decide the division. And I don't think it's going to be the Giants versus the Cowboys battling for the division, but rather the Reds, or, oh, God, almost
2 weeks in a row,
the football team, the Washington football team, They have the easiest schedule of everyone else. I just don't see them winning consecutive football games to set themselves up. It's going to come down to week 17, in my opinion. And like the NFC East every year, it's always an interesting story. Just no one's really that good.
Tim,
And
I'll do you one better than that. I don't even think it's the Giants versus anyone else. I think it's the Giants versus themselves. If they can get past themselves, even when Daniel Jones gets back, because I have to say, the next couple of weeks without Daniel Jones and without Saquon are definitely going to be rough if Daniel Jones is held out. But once he gets back, it's just going to be if they can perform. If the Giants don't give up the game, they have the East.
Well, I think the other thing, too, is if Colt McCoy can throw 5 yards downfield or shade anything back from his Texas days, we have a little bit of a chance. But, again, at the end of the day, if there's no offensive movement and everything's going to be Wayne Gallman on Sunday, it doesn't matter what team you play. You could play the 0-16 Cleveland Browns. If you're a one-dimensional football team, you're going to be stopped. It's that simple. So they have to find motion. And if I'm being honest, if there is no Daniel Jones on Sunday, more than ever, this puts a spotlight on what essentially this coaching staff is made of. Not just Joe Judge, but you look on the defensive end and how aggressive their play calls may be. And of course, when you look at it, what is Jason Garrett going to call on the offensive end? You're going to have to change a lot because, Daniel Jones is, a somewhat mobile quarterback. Colt McCoy really isn't that anymore at his age. You're going to have to change up a lot of things on the fly. So I think there's a lot of pressure on Jason Garrett this week if Daniel Jones is ruled out.
And you mentioned Washington, too. I kind of have some faith in this Washington team. And I even, we'll get to our picks in a little bit. But I was hesitant to actually take the Steelers over Washington. I'm going to roast the Steelers in a few minutes, too. But the Washington, Alex Smith has come back, and I know he's not mobile like he used to be, but he's doing a pretty good job. That team also has a pretty solid O-line. They've been protecting him well. Antonio Gibson, the rookie running back, has been really strong. I mean, he ran for 3 touchdowns on Thanksgiving against Dallas. Terry McLaurin is, I believe, 3rd in the NFL in receiving yards behind DK Metcalf and Tyreek Hill. There's some weapons in this Washington offense, and I could see them string together a couple of wins and go on a roll. I do want to touch on my Eagles for a moment. They're not winning this division. I think, honestly, I'd even argue that Dallas has a better chance of winning the division at this point. Carson Wentz, that was a flat-out embarrassing performance on Monday Night Football. That one throw where it was 4th and 4, and he throws to nobody but a Seahawks defensive player, and to be held to 7 points by the worst defense in the NFL for 3.5 quarters is ridiculous. And what are they trying to do with Jalen Hurts? They said, he's going to get in some time with the first team guys. He's going to get some snaps. They put him in for 3 plays. They just randomly throw him in for 1 play. Then he'd be out for a quarter and a half. Then they put him in again. It makes no sense. And Doug Peterson, I appreciate his Philly special and how he was able to get us the Super Bowl. But why does he go for 2 when it's not necessary? There was that game against the Bengals earlier this year where they were, I think, down by, I forgot how much they were down by, but it made no sense, with the score, that he went for 2. And then he ended up in that tie, and then they punted instead of trying to go for it on 4th down. And then he decides to go for it on 4th down at the 15 when they could have gotten a field goal and made it a 1-possession game either way on Monday night. It's just getting very frustrating. Carson Wentz is struggling mightily this year. I have kind of lost faith in him at this point because this is the year the Eagles should be taking advantage of this because other than Ertz, they have not had a ton of big injuries compared to the last 2 years. And with how the NFC East has just been ravaged with injuries between Saquon and then everything with the Cowboys and Washington's quarterback situation, this should have been a year that the Eagles could have marched right through. I'm not saying they would have won a playoff game, but they should have won the division, and they should have won at least 8 games. So it's very frustrating to see this happening. And I kind of, at this point, I want to see Jalen Hurts get some action because these next 4 weeks, they play Green Bay, New Orleans, Arizona, I think, are the next 3 games. And then they have 2 division games left against Washington and the Cowboys. I don't see them winning any more than 2 of those games. And honestly, I could see them going 1-4. So, I think that this is a time that you kind of see what Jalen Hurts is worth. But I want to shift gears now to the NFC South with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We have Zoe Alter here, so we can get into one of our historic Tom Brady debates.
Oh, yeah, let's do it.
The first quarter of the Buccaneers-Chiefs game on Sunday was not good for Tom Brady and was not good for the Buccaneers defense. And Tyreek Hill and Mahomes put up video game numbers. I was playing against both of them in fantasy. I was up by 55 when that game started. I checked my phone 15 minutes later, and I'm losing by 2 because they had 57 points combined in the first quarter. So the Chiefs were up 17-0 after the first quarter. And then after that, the Buccaneers outscored them 24-10 and almost came back in that game. I am going to say that team showed a lot of resiliency to come back and make it a game in a game that they could have completely just put their hands up at the end of the first quarter and just given up and been like, you know what, a loss is a loss. Let's just focus on the next game. Tom Brady got better in the second half. Rob Gronkowski actually had a nice game, his first 100-yard receiving game as a member of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I am not ready to sour on Tom Brady just yet. I still think this team has a chance. They have a pretty easy schedule the rest of the way. They're done with New Orleans. They've got this Chiefs game over with. I still think there's a chance that this team could go decently far in the playoffs.
I definitely think the rest of the season could go really well for them. And Tom Brady's always a threat. I will admit that. But I just don't love the way he uses his receivers. And he's still not throwing that deep. And that is the thing. I get that the receivers have shifted. And that's great that they've been able to change and become different kinds of receivers. But the best way that those receivers are used is when they go straight downfield and you just chuck the ball up and they get it. If they had a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, they'd be 10 times better than they are. Maybe they wouldn't have, what do they have now, 5 losses or something? Maybe some of those losses wouldn't have been losses. And this game, I was very, very impressed by their offense. I will give you that, Eddie. I was impressed by the way they worked together. I was impressed by the way they string together 14 points in the last quarter. I was really impressed. But I think that they're at a certain level, but they could be so much better. And that's why I don't know what the right word is, but that's why I'm hard on the team, because I know they could be better if they had a different quarterback. And sure, Tom Brady might be having success there, but there are better quarterbacks that should be in Tampa.
Well, okay,
that's where I am.
Tom Brady's better than Jameis Winston. You got to.
I will give you that.
Yeah.
I will give you that any day. But I think this Buccaneers team could be way better with a quarterback who isn't Tom Brady.
But you see, I'm going to disagree on that one point, though, here, Zoe, because here's the thing. I looked at this game, and I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to pinpoint the loss on Tom Brady. Yes, he threw 2 interceptions, but his 2 interceptions really weren't terrible throws. One came off a deflection off a lineman's helmet, and the other one was basically off a drop pass. There's nothing he really did wrong on those 2 interceptions for both of them to occur, which when you look at it, they were driving downfield across the 50 and would have resulted in more points. So the way I think of it is this. Yes, the Buccaneers are falling apart. There's a lot of issues with Bruce Arians right now. By the way, he built a team around Tom Brady, and they're not having the success that they want. But let's not forget this. This is probably the final year for Bruce Arians. Josh McDaniels, somehow, some way, will find his way down south to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and we'll be talking about a whole different story next year. Tom Brady is still a good quarterback. Yes, he checks down, but so did Eli Manning. So did Peyton Manning. But no one talked about that either towards the end of his career.
Towards the end of Peyton Manning's career?
But Peyton Manning
got benched during the season, and he came back for the Super Bowl. He didn't, during the middle of the season, he played so bad. Do you remember the beginning of that Super Bowl season? Do you remember? I had him in fantasy, and he got -8 points.
Yeah, but Zoe, they still won the Super Bowl.
They still won the Super Bowl, right? Tom Brady.
Yeah, they won the Super Bowl because the whole team did the rest of it. The Buccaneers don't have the depth that it's not the same thing. They don't have a Von Miller.
But, okay, the Buccaneers, I see, here's the thing. Yes, you play in the NFC South. You have a bunch of good teams, and I'm being honest. Unlike the AFC North, which has 3 good football teams, and really, in my opinion, 2 good football teams, and 1 mediocre team that's taking advantage of the tank division. The tank division, the NFC East, aka the Cleveland Browns of the AFC North. You don't really have an overpowered division. The NFC South has that. Every team in that division is somewhat sound. Even the Panthers, who are having a terrible year, have found ways to be competitive against good football teams when it matters. I think it's the fact of the matter that this is a good football team that's playing against a bunch of other good football teams. And that division is always unpredictable. I'm telling you, once they come to the playoffs, you're going to see new Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And they have a different entity. They have a balance. If I'm being honest, unlike any other football team, they can run the ball. They can pass. They can mix things up, which makes them very, very different. And when you have a guy like Antonio Brown, Rob Gronkowski, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin, there's going to be some success. These are excellent players. Just because they're underwhelming to this point, it doesn't matter. It's about how they finish, not how they are through the first 11 weeks. If they finish the rest of this season strong and build momentum, they can build up for a championship. That's when it really does matter, not at this point in the season.
And we've seen it a few times before where teams, and you mentioned the Broncos, that things weren't going well. Peyton was out. Then they came back out on a roll and won the Super Bowl against a Panthers team that started the year on like this incredible undefeated run. So you never know. But my whole contention is this. The Buccaneers, Tom Brady's still having a decent year. A lot of the situations that have happened, the interceptions, have not been his fault. We saw it pretty evident against the Chiefs. I think the defense is something that needs to improve for this Buccaneers team because the offense is scoring points. There's been a lot of games that have been high scoring. The only exceptions are the game against New Orleans and then that game against Chicago on Thursday Night Football. Other than that, they've been scoring points every time they've been out in the field. So the defense has to step up. But the one thing that still gives me hope with this team is that there's going to be a lot of inexperienced teams in the playoffs. Whoever comes out of the NFC East is going to be inexperienced. Minnesota, if they make the playoffs, other than Kirk Cousins and Thielen, that's a pretty inexperienced team. Kyler Murray in Arizona, they've never played in the playoffs before, except for Larry Fitzgerald and Hopkins. Rest of the team, they're all new to this. This is where Tampa Bay's experience, people are all, vamping on the team, this is like guys that were good 7-8 years ago. But guess what? All these guys have a lot of playoff experience. Antonio Brown, conference championship. Tom Brady, Super Bowl. Gronkowski, Super Bowl. Leonard Fournette, conference championship. Jason Pierre-Paul, Super Bowl. These are a lot of these guys who know what it's like to play in a postseason atmosphere. And I don't care if there's fans there or not. The playoff games have, they have higher. It just means so much more when you're in the postseason. And a team like the Arizona Cardinals or whoever comes out of the NFC East, I can see them struggle and Tom Brady be able to carry through and find some success because he really wants to avenge what happened last year against the Titans in the postseason. But I want to go ahead, Zoe.
I was going to say, even if they find success, and I will leave it at this, the thing is that you guys both mentioned Antonio Brown. I think, honestly, if anything is their downfall, sure, they're playing at a good level right now, and there are some inexperienced teams, but they're not going to get a championship, first of all. There's just no conceivable way that happens. And then, second of all, Antonio Brown is going to tear this team apart because if he finds his way on the field and gets more time, he's going to tear the whole team apart because of the way the team is built. The team is built with all these crazy starts, as you mentioned, from 8 years ago, guys that were good. And the guys may still be good, but they've found a way to build a rhythm. And he's going to come in and tear that apart because as soon as they get into postseason play, Antonio Brown is going to say, that's my football team, and I'm the king here now. He's not going to be able to back down. He doesn't have it in him. Everything he says is egotistical. He can't step down for Godwin or Evans to step up and play well. He's going to need to be the top receiver there, and that's going to blow the whole team up.
But what is the issue, essentially, if he's doing his job on the football field? All off-field antics aside, I think that Antonio Brown still, might I add, with, being out of the game so long, has proven that he could still be a very physical receiver. I mean,
as the number one receiver on a team.
Look at comparisons. Look how long Des Bryant's been out of the game and how terrible, let's be honest, he
You're
looked.
comparing Des Bryant at his best to Antonio Brown at his best.
But Antonio Brown, but let's not forget Antonio Brown has been underrated almost his entire career, is arguably and was arguably the best wide receiver football has seen in the last 15 years, up there in the names with Julio Jones. And when you look at it, this guy turned from a special teams player, he was a kickoff returner and a punt returner, to a superstar in the NFL. All due respect, he knows what it takes to be successful. He wants to win.
He knows what it means to be successful for him.
Just because he has an ego doesn't mean that he's not going to do his job on the football field.
Those two contradict his ego and doing his job because he can let his team do their thing. He doesn't.
But
know
you're
how to
saying
let
that his superstar mentality is going to take over, and that it's not going to. It's going to be his football team, and that's going to kill them on the football field. But that we haven't seen that.
Yeah, because he's never not been a wide receiver one on a team. He doesn't know any other way to play. He's the guy who he asks for the ball and he gets the ball. That's not going to happen.
But he makes other receivers better. Has he not made
too.
Juju Smith-Schuster a much better receiver? How's Juju doing right now with the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I'm not saying Juju's a better receiver. That's why I'm saying he was always the wide receiver one.
He's not doing so well right now, right?
He's not going to be the wide receiver one for Tampa.
I mean, at least what we saw in one preseason game, so be it, at least he was a threat on the football field. I'm excited to see what Antonio Brown is because he's not considered the biggest threat in this team as of the moment. But once he gets in a rhythm, not having a preseason, he really may be the guy that they're going to have to look at. And if they don't, I wouldn't be surprised if he scored touchdown after touchdown.
There's one more thing I just want to say on this that kind of ties everything together. When Antonio Brown was with the Patriots last year, I know it was small sample size, but it was the only time in the last, 3 years or so that he actually seemed sane for about a week and a half. And you remember the reason he was released was not because of, something that happened with the team. It was because of the domestic violence investigation that came apart. And Bill Belichick was like, nah, I don't want to get involved in all this. Let's just get rid of him at this point. But when he was with Tom Brady for that one game against the Dolphins, I know it was a small sample size, but he seemed a lot more, down to earth than he was with the Raiders, with the Steelers. I think that Tom Brady has found something in Antonio Brown, and the two can kind of work together. Brown kind of realizes the talent he's with, and I think he's able to kind of control himself, as hard as that might seem. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see. But for now, he's not wide receiver one, and I don't think he's going to be wide receiver one anytime soon. They still have Evans and Godwin, and the Buccaneers are still a good team. But let's talk about the last thing. The Steelers-Ravens game, which got pushed 3 times. Now, first of all, the hypocrisy of the NFL that forced the Denver Broncos to play without a quarterback and get killed by New Orleans, yet they'll postpone this Ravens game so many times, and they still want to get it in, but they push it all the way back to a Wednesday afternoon. And Pittsburgh Steelers, I know they were without Pouncey and they were without James Conner, but you had everybody else. And the fact that they were only able to beat RG3 and Trace McSorley by 5 points is a little concerning. And I know they're 11-0, and I'm not saying the Steelers are a bad team, but I don't see this team beating the Kansas City Chiefs if it comes down to that in the AFC Championship, even if the game's at Heinz Field. I just don't. I know Roethlisberger's got a lot of playoff experience, but this team still has some holes. They always get off the slow starts in games. And we saw it on Sunday with the Buccaneers against the Chiefs. You can't afford that against Kansas City. You just cannot. So, and also the defense is starting to get injured. Now they lost Bud Dupree for the season with a torn ACL. That is a huge hit for this team. And Mike Tomlin's definitely got his work cut out for him, because this game against the Ravens, I know everything was all, thrown out of whack because of getting moved 3 different times, but you cannot, if you're going to be an undefeated team, only win by 5 against a third-string quarterback.
I mean, you can say it's thrown out of whack and you have to play it at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday. That's fine. You keep moving it back. But the truth of the matter is, this is a Ravens team who literally could have been like an XFL team. If you look at who they had on the field, you get rid of the quarterback situation. You don't even need that. I get that you don't have Lamar. You're without your 2 running backs, even though their running back committee, I don't even want to talk about that. That's a whole mess, right? Your defense is depleted by this point. Everyone's injured. And if they're not injured, the Ravens are falling apart at the moment. Nothing's going well for them. Nothing's working. So you're playing against a team that I can't even call them the Ravens, because in my head, the Ravens have been good. This team is not good. This Ravens team is not good in any sense. And the Steelers, they should have came in. This should have been a game where they barely even let the Ravens score points. I don't even know how the Ravens put up points. I don't care if it was offensive or defensive points. There should have been no points on the board. Because if this Steelers team prides himself on their defense, I don't know what that defense was. And sure, you have guys that are hurt and everything, But if you're still missing your two biggest ones, and you're missing James Conner and a couple other guys, that shouldn't change the way the whole game went. And in addition, the last thing, and then Tim, I'll let you go because I know you're probably raring to go on this one. But the last thing is that I will give you on the thing, the Buccaneers offense is good, right? And if the Chiefs play the Steelers, the Chiefs come out and do that, the Steelers offense is nowhere near the Buccaneers offense. And I'll give you that because I know that's our biggest debate, but I will give you that. And the Steelers, they just don't have the horsepower that the Buccaneers do on offense. They can't turn it on like that. And so they need to get out to early leads, which they don't. So if they don't, they need their defense to be the thing driving them. And you can't let a third string quarterback with a team that has zero running game whatsoever come out and literally you're only down by 5. It's insane to me. I heard it and I was like, I was excited when Trace McSorley won it because I was like, I want the Ravens to win at this point because the Steelers deserve to lose after what they did there.
Well, first off, I don't know where to start in regards to how the NFL handled this situation. Because, Eddie, you mentioned, the Denver Broncos essentially having to suffer on Sunday without a single quarterback after their own management reported and followed protocol upon reporting COVID incidences, and yet they have to suffer for doing the right thing. And I understand why the game was played on Sunday. There was no more additional COVID incidences, so they felt the players on the field would be safe. And to my understanding, there was only 9 cases. The reason the Ravens should have been able to play this week is, to me, first off, outrageous. COVID cases were adding on every single day. I don't care who was on the football field. The fact that you were willing to risk the Pittsburgh Steelers and any other future opponents because of this aspect is absolutely embarrassing. And the fact that the NFL is not being transparent about this really is wrongful because to me, I have a huge issue when you're risking lives out on the football field. This situation with this pandemic is massive and it is an issue. And for them to, give the okay for this game and continue to push it back, it should have resulted in the forfeit. Because now they have to change this whole schedule yet again. And we're going to see, Pittsburgh playing, I believe, Monday night, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And, when you look at for the Ravens, they're going to have to go through. And by the way, Pittsburgh still hasn't really had a bye week, but they continued chugging along. And I just really think that this wasn't fair on the NFL's part. This wasn't well thought out. And it goes back to our point, Eddie, when we talked about this before the season began. The NFL had no plans for COVID. Let's be honest. There was no preparation. We thought, hey, maybe they would think about a bubble, seeing the success. It didn't happen. And it's showing to come back to bite them, essentially, that their preparation for COVID has been terrible. And really, I'm not surprised if there's going to be another big lawsuit when it's all said and done come the end of the year, because it is a massive, massive issue. But now going away from the NFL for a moment, addressing the Steelers aspect. They didn't play 100%. I can agree on that, against the Ravens. To an extent, they deserve to lose the football game. But at the same time, there's a lot this team still has to go through. You mentioned no James Conner. I think it's an aspect, though, that let's not forget this is a team driven by its defense, not its offense. And it goes back to the point of what we saw back at Super Bowl 50. Just because you're having a mediocre season offensively, just because you're not successful, and yes, this is an offensive era driven in football, does not mean that the best offensive team or the best average team wins in the big game. The Kansas City Chiefs are really good. They just won a Super Bowl. But let's not forget that if they don't come out firing the first day and that Pittsburgh Steelers defense is somehow successful, let's say if they were to even make the AFC Championship game, they may not win. The Chiefs may not win that game. But we can only take guesses until that time comes. But for the Pittsburgh Steelers, you lose Bud Dupree. That's a big hit. But you need everyone else to stay healthy. And when you don't have bye weeks, that is really, really hard to do. But if this defense doesn't let down, they continue to play, I'm very convinced that this team can win every football game that they have throughout the rest of their season. They may be the weakest 16-0 team in history, considering the fact that only the New England Patriots of recent have done it. But this is a team that is going to be successful. They may not make the Super Bowl, but considering everything that has gone for them this year, every hurdle they've had to jump, in my heart, they're Super Bowl champions because of how much they've had to face. But we'll see. This is a team that continues to face adversity, still chugging. And I'm sure to an extent, Eddie, you probably agree in that regard.
Yeah, I will say, if you just think about this like from a feel-good standpoint, with everything the Steelers have had to deal with, not really having a bye week, they've earned this. They've had to deal with so much throughout this season. But I will say once again, this team, they're 11-0. I think they've kind of chalked it up in some easy ways to get there, and I don't know how they're going to stand against the Chiefs or maybe even Tennessee in the playoffs. The AFC North, we were talking about how great this division was at the beginning of the year, but all three of the good teams have some major concerns. The Steelers seem to play down to their opponents. The Steelers, other than Cleveland, the game against Cleveland, they're not blowing out the teams they're playing against, and they get off to a slow start every time. And like we said, against an offense like the Chiefs, or if you're playing Tennessee with Derrick Henry, you can't afford that, especially with how good the defenses are for both those teams. For Cleveland, the problem is easily Baker Mayfield. I mean, he is so erratic at quarterback. I don't know how you can really trust something. And with Baltimore, I mean, we talked about it all the way at the beginning of the season, Tim, and you were right. You said this team was going to take a step back because they made absolutely no changes from last year, and defenses were going to start to figure out Lamar Jackson. Well, both those things have happened this year, and the Ravens are now sitting 6-5 on the outside looking in. But one last thing to wrap up before we get to our picks, just on the COVID situation. We knew it was going to continue, and now that there's the second wave, it's picked up. The NFL, since about week 5, there hadn't been any issues, really. I mean, there'd been the stray positive test or two, but no games had been moved in almost 2 months. So it's tough to see this happen, but I don't know about actually playing this game this week because, frankly, the only people that this actually made happy were the Pittsburgh Steelers because they didn't have to get the game moved around too much and that they didn't have to have an extra week added on. The only people it was convenient for were for the Steelers and for the NFL, because for player safety, it certainly wasn't a good idea. For the TV standpoint, guess what? You did not get much of an audience at all because a tree lighting was more important than watching the game, which is fair. I understand because that's a big thing on NBC, but who's watching a game at Wednesday at 3 o'clock with both teams completely debilitated with nobody out there? And it just really is frustrating. And once again, just no consistency because the NFL has no plan. With the Broncos, the Ravens get the days pushed back, and a lot of people are saying the game moves an extra day so they could try to see if they could get J.K. Dobbins or Mark Ingram back, which turned out they couldn't. But, Denver doesn't get any postponements, yet they have to play without a quarterback and get embarrassed by New Orleans. But let's finish off with our Week 13 pick'em games, Tim. I'm going to go through my 3 picks first. I'm going to start off in Atlanta, where I think the Saints and Taysom Hill are going to take care of business against the Falcons. The Falcons have played well against New Orleans the last couple of times they've faced off, but I think Taysom Hill is going to be able to take down the Falcons, who are coming off of a huge win over Las Vegas, but I think the Saints get this one. Second game, Miami against Cincinnati. I mean, everybody was excited at the beginning of the year. Maybe this will be Tua against Burrow. Only Tua if he's healthy, but I think regardless, the Dolphins are going to win this one. The Bengals, without Burrow, this team has no real direction. And last game, I've got no faith in my Eagles. I think Aaron Rodgers and the Packers are going to destroy them at Lincoln Financial Field on Sunday. But Tim, who's your 3 picks?
Well, shame on you for voting against your team. I wouldn't have the audacity to do that against my New York Giants. But I will say this. One thing, though, that Green Bay has a history, you mentioned about the Pittsburgh Steelers, Green Bay has a tendency as well of playing down to their opponent. I wouldn't guarantee that.
We talked about that last week, but my thing is, I just think the Eagles are so bad, that's not even going to happen.
Well, a very good point. Carson Wentz could probably throw about 3 or 4 interceptions and maybe give some points to Green Bay. But I'm going to go with my picks. And speaking of a team that's going to give a lot of points, I would play the Raiders defense this week if you're a big fantasy team. Las Vegas playing the New York Jets. Sam Darnold did not look good coming back from injury. And let's be honest, the Jets are falling apart. They're going to go 0-16. And the Raiders, after coming off a tough loss, face another easy football team, and that's where they tend to rebound. So expect them to come out and beat the Jets. But then again, based upon last year, being honest, who really knows in that regard, because they came out and they stunned Las Vegas last season. But I expect the Raiders to come out fighting hard. My other pick, again, the other team tanking in the AFC, I have the Minnesota Vikings beating the Jacksonville Jaguars. I honestly think this is going to be a hefty running game for Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook's had an incredible season, someone as well that really should be considered for MVP. He's done a very good job, protecting the football and scoring touchdowns. And that Jacksonville defense has fallen apart through all the trades and everything. And quite frankly, Blake Bortles wasn't the problem. So, expect them to really have an emphasis on the run. And I think that's going to help them prevail to a big victory over Jacksonville. And my final game, well, we mentioned the depleted quarterbacks a couple moments ago. I have the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, just demolishing, if I'm being honest, this Denver team. When I looked at it last week, Eddie, and I'm being honest, through all these injuries, I could not believe that Denver won 4 football games this year. And I know this sounds outrageous, but this may be the worst 4-win football team I've ever seen in history of the NFL. Because to me, they feel like they're a 1-win, 2-win team with all the injuries they've had. They haven't had good quarterback play. They haven't played good defensively, but somehow they've won 4 football games somewhere, somehow, some way. And that, to me, is astonishing alone, but they still stand no chance against the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, but let's think about who those 4 wins are against. One's against the Chargers, who simply can't win no matter how big their lead is. One's against the Jets. One's against the Dolphins, who completely blew a game against them. And then the Patriots and Cam Newton, who can't win at home anymore. So, I don't think any of those wins are really that big of accomplishments. I think it's kind of just luck of the schedule and the fact that they're playing 4 games against the AFC East that, because I know we rip apart the NFC East, but the AFC East, aside from Buffalo and spurts, has not been anything to really celebrate either this year. But it's going to about wrap things up for today. Zoe, thanks so much for coming on again.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm always happy to tear up you guys with football. You know that.
All right. So we hope everybody has a great weekend. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
And this is Sports Speak.